All right, good evening, everyone. So while I have the privilege to start this presentation, I do want to acknowledge the tremendous amount of work that Jill and her team have put into this presentation, and I will shortly turn over the reins to her. But really, almost this entire presentation was put together by her. So as we do each year and we begin to build a budget, we keep in mind that the students are really at the center of all we do. So I thought it was important to recognize the district's new core values, because this is really what is the purpose of everything we do, right? And this is the intent of what our school budget will support. And if you notice, the first core is community, right? And recognizing that it takes a community in order to support our schools and our students. We very much appreciate the work of our building leaders, all they do. But really, this budget is about preparing our future leaders and our students to become leaders within our school. A quick look at our enrollment. We have a total of 1,481 students. The elementary school, we anticipate a decline of approximately 52 students. The main reason for this is we're happy to have a very large class moving over to the middle school, 130-something students. And right now, we anticipate a very small incoming kindergarten class. So really, the delta between those two numbers is what's really driving that factor right there. We are looking to add one teacher. That also offsets the teacher who will be taking on the role of behaviorist at our elementary school. Other staff remains the same. Middle school, we anticipate 3 new students. So while they're getting a large class, they're also losing a large class. So they're pretty status quo. In the high school, we expect to have 15 extra students. So again, they're gaining a pretty large class moving over. Just a quick look at our administrative offices. So we currently have 21.25 staff. 0.25 is a part-time person, not a part of a person. So that includes 8 administrators and 13.25 support staff members, and there's no net change there. We're not increasing any staff at the district office. Transportation, as you're aware, we've added several members to our transportation department this year. It's brought it up to 19 staff members, which include 3 administrative and support positions, 11 drivers, and 5 monitors. Now, there's no new transportation staff built into this budget, but there's a little caveat on the bottom saying, once we get pricing for our new bus contract, it may be economical for us to hire more of our own drivers and save us money as opposed to giving the contracted bus provider extra routes. So while there's nothing built in, we could easily transfer money that was otherwise earmarked for the contractor into our own staff if that's economically viable. So really, our budget's broken down into 3 main categories. We want to support our academics, our programs, our professional development, continuing to improve everything that we do within our schools. Obviously, staff and contractual expenses is a huge part of our budget, and we have those obligations we must continue to meet. And transportation and facilities. Transportation's a big one. You're going to hear a lot about it this evening because it's very much an unknown for us. Our bus contractor has notified us that they would no longer be continuing under their contract. We'll be issuing a response for proposal. That same bus contractor is able to bid again on his work. So while he's not willing to work for our current project, for our current contract, doesn't mean that he won't submit a new one. And we know other districts, neighboring districts, have been forced down this path and have seen significant increases in how much that they have to pay for transportation. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jill. Thank you.
Good evening. Okay, so I'm going to run through our budget for 24-25, which obviously remains student-focused, fiscally responsible, and under the tax cap, and it is balanced. So part of our challenges, I guess, balancing the budget this year are, of course, living within our 2% tax cap and in an economy that's well over, risen well over 5% over the last year. So while that remains true, our health insurance premiums are increasing 5%. Last year we saw an 8% increase. So they've increased less, but they're still increasing. I'd like to say that part of that is due to, let's say, 33% of the cost of those benefits are for post-employment benefits for retiree health costs. The district's made a lot of strides in changing that landscape in the bargaining unit contracts for the two major bargaining unit contracts so far are teaching and non-teaching staff. We're seeing contributions in retirement, which is going to help hopefully mitigate that retiree piece in the long run over time. It's going to take time, though, to catch up. Bargaining unit contracts are addressing regional salary increases. So these are some of the changes you're going to see within the budget that I thought were significant. So I'm marking those. Our vendor contracts, as well as the cost of materials and supplies, are increasing across the board. Simple cost of doing business for labor, shipping, insurance requirements. Our vendors have to pay extra insurance sometimes to meet the requirements of our district's property liability insurance and whatnot. And so their prices are increasing for that reason as well. Our property insurance premiums for our own district facilities are increasing 16%. They've gone up over 36% in the last 2 years. Special education students are now aging out at 22 instead of 21. Not that we have a significant number that will be taking advantage of that, but it is something to note. Transportation home to school routes, overall estimated cost increases, we're looking possibly at 40%. As Dr. Luft mentioned, we are going out for a request for proposal for those services, being that our contractor does not want to renew the contract at the current rate. There are a lot of factors involved, but as far as that 40% goes, we're looking at what our costs too. Those include the Putnam Valley District route costs and also the contracted vendor routes. And again, it's just an estimate. We really don't know at this time. We're expecting the RFP results to not come back until May. So at that point, we will already have an adopted budget. We expect to adopt the budget April 11th. So, we're going to have to do our best guess estimates up until, we're able to determine what those might be. Small changes in revenue sources that are helping us to balance the budget. Of course, because we can, we're utilizing the 2% tax cap, will continue to force us to use some of our reserves as well. We're seeing increased interest earnings of about $500,000. I'm hoping that we'll see slightly more, but I'm not sure, so I had to stay kind of conservative on that figure. We never know what's going to happen in the last 6 months of the year. We can predict maybe through June at this point, but after that, we have no way of really predicting that. Additional tuitioning students from Garrison, we could bring in about $150,000 for that. Our increased foundation aid, we're only seeing about $120,000. I shouldn't be saying it too much too negatively about that because there are many districts who are seeing decreases. So we are seeing a little bit of revenue there. Additional transportation aid. So the reason I'm mentioning this is it's because once our transportation is an expense-based aid, so what we spend on transportation will drive up the aid that we get for transportation, but it's only paying 60 cents on the dollar. So we're still going to be behind, but people will see that we may have a higher number for transportation aid, but yet it's because we have a higher cost as well. So I wanted to mention that. And We will be using reserves in the proposed budget. You'll see $399,000.
What are our current reserves at this point?
About 18% of our total budget, which is about $14 million.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, there's restricted reserves. Unrestricted reserves are at 4%, okay? And that's our limit. We're not
No, I
allowed to be
understand
above
that.
that.
Yeah.
So, well, there are many districts who do go above that, but we stay within the limits of what the law
Okay.
allows.
Thank you.
Okay, so here's a look at our revenues, what we're expecting. So our state aid, like I said, we're seeing an increase there. 16.5 million we're expecting. Our other local revenues, which includes that interest amount that I mentioned, 970,000. Our transfer in from our debt service fund will cover some of the cost of our debt, so that it can, we are in hopes of replacing the turf and track next summer of 2025. So in order to be able to transfer that money into the capital fund to incur those expenses for the track and field, we will use $1.3 million of our debt reserve to pay down our debt instead of using budgeted operating funds for that. School taxes, okay, our tax cap has come in at 2.59%. I've set 2.56 in the budget. It's just about $13,000 difference between the top of the cap and what we have it set at. Our fund balance reserves are at $399,000. That's what I just mentioned we were using for reserves. Total budget being $60.5 million, or a 4.15% increase over the prior year. So I want to go over the tax cap again. We did it we did it in December. We went over it in December when we talked about the 5-year outlook, and I think it's worth going through again. I think people, don't understand the tax cap and how it's calculated. It's like an 8-step formula, and we don't make up the formula. This formula is given to us by the state. So the prior year's tax levy is what we start out with. This is how we determine what our tax cap is, our allowable tax cap. So we start with the prior year's tax levy. We're allowed to factor in the allowable growth factor for us is 1.0052. It is different for every school district in the state. So that measures the quantity change in the amount of locally assessed taxable real property on our assessment rolls in comparison to the prior year. So for that, we get to add $209,560. Then we remove our capital debt expenses versus our building aid, which is also known as our local share of debt expense. So that's from last year, and that's 1.1 million. And then we get to factor in the assumed CPI. Now, we all know the CPI is much higher than 2%, but it's capped at 2%. We're only allowed to add 2% no matter what no matter how high it is. If it was lower, we would only be allowed to factor in the lower amount, but it's capped at 2%. So that gives us $786,930 to add to that number. And then we have our subtotal there. That's just where we are at this point in the calculation. And then our exclusions. So we have our new debt expense, which is, again, it's just the opposite of what you see in step 3. This will be our new debt expense versus our building aid for the upcoming year, which is $1.2 million. And then, because of our, so anytime any of our pension plan contributions, whether they're the teacher's retirement system or the employee's retirement system, go above 2% of an increase from one year to the next, we are allowed to add the difference. And in this case, our employees' retirement system has gone up 2.1%, so we're allowed to add 0.1%, which is $5,552. And then this is our tax cap that we've submitted to the state at 2.59. We've reported that we are allowed to raise $41.3 million. So that is how we arrive at the allowable cap. So where does all that money go? It goes to salaries, benefits, out-of-district tuitions, professional services, utilities, repairs and maintenance, transportation and equipment, and supplies. So everything that we purchase in the district, that's where all of our revenues go. Here's an outlook of all those expenses and how they're being proposed for the upcoming year. So we have our instructional services for general education. That includes, anything in our general education program, including the salaries and benefits for those. I'm sorry, not the benefits, only the salaries for that staff. So that's 30% of our budget. The special education area of instruction is 13% of our budget. Our instructional media and library automated services, 2.8% of our budget. Pupil services and athletics, 7% of our budget. Transportation is almost 7%. General support, that includes our district administrative offices, our legal costs, and insurance costs, 4.4% of our budget. Central services, that's operations and maintenance. It covers all facilities and maintenance for our entire district, all 3 buildings, 5%. Employee benefits, 22.91%. So between our, I'm going to say all salaries and benefits combined, it makes up about 70% of our total budget. Our debt service is our principal and interest payments. I mentioned earlier that we have to pay on our outstanding debt, and that's about 5% of our budget, 5.3% of our budget. Interfund transfers, that is the $1.3 million I mentioned we are putting in our budget to put aside for the track and field. It's not the entire amount that we need for the track and field. We'll be budgeting a similar amount next year in the budget. We split it between the 2 years. There's no reason to increase the level of the budget when we can do it over 2 years. The work will not be done until the summer of 2025 anyway. So that is 2.3% of the total budget. And again, the total budget being $60.5 million, or a 4.15% increase over last year. Our three-part,
Gil, before you go on, could
Sure.
you just go back? So if I'm looking at the percentage of change in the budget,
yes.
so I know that the transportation is 15% change, but that's because of the new, we're budgeting for a new contract?
It's only estimates. We anticipate that our costs will increase at least that much.
Okay.
We don't know. I mean, as we get closer to adopting the budget, our estimates could change. I don't really know that we'll have that entire, like I said, we're not going to have that information until after we adopt the budget.
And the other fairly large one is the instructional media.
Right.
Why that large a
So
jump?
we budgeted for our library specialist at the middle school in the
Okay,
COVID
all right.
in the COVID-related funds,
Okay.
and now it's been moved into the budget, and we're also
Okay.
seeing big increases in technology expenses, and so forth. So it's a combination of things,
Okay.
and then there's salary increases and natural vendor
there's a
increases.
person in there. Okay,
Yeah,
all right.
throughout the entire. So that percent change in budget obviously is from this year to last year, and the percent of the total budget is your last column that you're
Right.
seeing on the right.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
And the state asked us to break that down into 3 categories: program, capital, and administration. So our program is 75% of our budget. Our capital expenses are about 14% of our budget, and administration is about 11% of our budget. And then I will turn it over to Dr. Luft.
So the purpose of this slide is to really focus on 2 of the factors that are really driving what that budget-to-budget increase is. As Jill had mentioned, 4.15%. But a significant portion of that is really being driven by these 2 items. And there's reasons why we would benefit long-term by spending money in our general fund to do these things. So as we had mentioned, replacement of the current track and field, as well as the fencing around it, is something that has been on our radar for many years. And we have 2 ways in which we can accomplish this work. We can go out to the public and bond that money, in which case we'd be paying interest on it over and over again, or we can follow the same approval process but use our existing general fund money and be able to get the work done sooner, which controls the escalation costs and construction costs, which continually go up, and not incur any interest payments on that money. So that's $1.3 million. Transportation is something, again, outside of our control, but we knew we had to add more money to this budget to cover what we estimate our new transportation costs will be. So that's another $540,000. So these two items are increasing our budget by $1.84 million between the two of them. Without these two items, if we remove them from our budget, then our budget-to-budget increase would be 1%. So I'm going to continue to get that information out there. I don't want people to think that our actual expenditures are inflated up to 4%, because it's really, especially the capital expenditure, that money isn't even coming, that money's coming in from debt service, which is going to offset, free up money in order to do those projects. So I think it's just an important piece that without transportation and without the capital transfer, our budget to budget is really 1%. So, with a look, I'm like, oh, is this mine or yours? It speaks to, obviously, we've been talking a lot about the Facilities Planning Committee. We have an upcoming presentation where we're going to share the recommendations from the Facilities Planning Committee. And it's really just important. Our greatest assets are our buildings, and we have to continue to reevaluate what those needs are. So whether a building condition survey or the walkthroughs we did, we had a very engaged committee that participated throughout the process. And it's important that we maintain our greatest assets that this school district has. And we do our best to coincide it with expiring debt. So we're able to do new work without having any direct impact on the tax levy. Turn it back over.
So I'm not going to go through a lot of the wordy slides that you may have viewed throughout. I want them to be there because I want people who are not listening tonight and are not able to join us to be able to pull up these slides on our website and have a more extensive explanation as to what this all means, right? So we do want to maintain our facilities and our infrastructure, and we want to protect our property values, right? So how do we do that? Well, other than cutting things out of our budget, we have to decide what's the best way to do that. I can tell you, obviously, just like at your home, when you want to do a capital improvement or you want to save for something, that's the best way to do it. Because taking out a home equity loan is not going to save you any money. It's going to cost you more money in the long run. So what we have done in the past and what we need to do going forward is keep a capital reserve account. We've established a capital reserve. We did it in 2015, and it's going to be expiring in 2025, which is right around the corner. We're also on the cusp of another capital project, we know, in 27-28, because we're planning for that now. We have a planning facilities committee that's been meeting for the last 6 months at least, or maybe longer, lose track of time. And so when we get to that point, we don't want to have put on the brakes of saving our own money towards a capital project. In other words, we don't want to finance anything that we don't need to. So right now, because our capital reserve account is expiring, we want to talk about establishing a second capital reserve. So the first one we did was a maximum of $10 million over 10 years. We never reached the $10 million. We reached about $5 million. So by the end of this year, we will have reached about $5 million. We used about $600,000 of that in our project that we did last, because that's all we had at the time to use. Now we will continue to use it towards this next project coming up, and all of that money is money that we don't have to finance. So through thoughtful spending each year, we're not going to budget anything for this capital reserve. We're just going to take money that's remaining at the end of the school year and ask the board to transfer it into the capital reserve account. So moving forward, it would be called a Capital Reserve 2. This is establishing a new capital reserve, as I just explained. Again, it would be to reserve $10 million over 10 years if we ever got to that level. Obviously, a capital project with escalating costs and all of the things we just talked about, all of the inflation that we just talked about. By the time we do a project in 27, 28, we're trying to plan on what that cost escalation would be, what the interest rates would be. So we're trying to make good plans for that. And again, annual funding sources for that reserve could include year-end unexpended district budgetary appropriations, so everything that we're budgeting for now, so anything that's left over, and any unanticipated revenues that we receive between now and then could add to that reserve. So how do we do this? Well, there must be a voter-approved proposition establishing the reserve for a specific purpose or multiple purposes. And just backing up a little bit, you can see the second bullet there goes through all of the items that we could possibly use that capital reserve for. Unless the board designates the capital reserve to be for something specific, it can be for anything that's involved there. We have renovations, construction, reconstruction, improvements to the district's buildings, facilities, including original furnishings, equipment, machinery, so you name it, whatever's included in that capital project. The money can't be added to the reserve without board approval, and the money cannot be removed, this is very important, from the reserve without voter approval. So once the money goes into that reserve, it cannot be used for anything else but that. It can't be just redesignated to another type of reserve. It has to be voted out of the reserve in order to be used. And no money's added to the reserve unless there are remaining funds at the end of the school year, after we close our books, after we've accounted for all of the accounts expenses that are due and payable. And there is that maximum amount that I mentioned. We're looking to set that amount at $10 million over 10 years. I just think it's a random number, actually. It's not, if I say 5 million and we can't go over it, if we say, so, it's just easier to do it that way. And you can see, as we've operated, nobody's gone to the max with it. We haven't raised, appropriations just to get to that number. It's just a placeholder for this money. And that's how we have to do it.
Jill, it's
Yes.
unfortunate that the state does not allow a district to retain the capital reserve beyond, the 10 years. It's
So the
almost-
first one is retained. It's just kept at that level.
But you have to reintroduce it every 10 years.
It's just a law. I guess there's a lot of ways of looking at it. I try to kind of reason it myself in saying, well, why can't we just add to the old one? What's the difference? Why can't we just reestablish or ask the voters to renew? I think, the people that voted on that, it was 10 years ago. Many of those people don't live here. It's a new, I understand that looking at it that way might be, but I think it's what they're looking at. They're just trying to decide, does the community still want that?
The problem is the community doesn't.
It's probably
I
an
think
old
at
law.
times it's very confusing to them.
Yeah.
You have it now. At the end of 10 years, we have to do this again. Well, what are you doing? Are you getting more money? How does this work? That's why it needs to be explained so thoroughly,
Yeah.
so that people understand it's what we already have. We're simply renewing it and transferring those funds and have the ability to add more.
Correct.
Within that 10-year time.
Right. That's why some of these slides may seem lengthy to you. I would encourage people to definitely reach out and ask questions about it. I'm always available for those conversations. It's a state law. It's something, it's a general municipal law that's been established, and it's never been changed. Maybe someday it will be.
Yeah, hopefully.
There's a lot of those. Okay, secondly, on the ballot, we're going to see a bus proposition number 2 as well. So last year, we established a bus proposition. We reestablished one that had run out. This is a little bit different because we're not putting money into it. This is just a placeholder for us to be able to borrow money should we have to replace buses or add additional buses. We've been talking about through this whole presentation that our contractor is no longer willing to work at the rates that were established in the contract. That's why we're going out for a new RFP. We are seeing that by currently utilizing in-district transportation, that we are seeing a savings based on that competitive contractor pricing. Therefore, retaining and replacing our fleet might be the way we want to go, and we won't be able to do that if we don't have a placeholder for this to be able to borrow money to purchase vehicles. So we would switch, in other words, from using our contractor to doing our own in-district transportation. We're not adding buses. There's about 40 buses in the entire, between the two, between our in-district buses and our out-of-district contracted buses. So we can't hire people if we don't have vehicles for them to drive. We aren't necessarily buying them, but we have to be prepared if that is the way things go. We don't have to use the money at all. This doesn't have a limitation in time, so it's really just permission from voters to say, if this is the way you need to go to make it less expensive for our community, then we need to have this authority to spend this money. So it reduces our reliance on our bus contractor rate increases due to what we are considering our driver shortages and also inflation. It increases the district's ability to maintain our own fleet. It provides flexibility to purchase vehicles when needed without large budgetary impacts. If I had to go out and buy a bus in the middle of a school year, and I've said this many times before, we would have to cut something else in order to do that. And you know, that's not something we have built into our budget to normally do. Provides flexibility to keep home to school routes, field trips, and sport runs at a fiscally responsible level. So again, this will be another proposition on the ballot as well as the capital reserve. So at this point, we are going to see a budget proposition for 24-25 at $60.5 million. We'll see a second proposition to establish a second capital reserve. We'll see a proposition to allow financing for the district buses, and we'll be electing 2 board trustees. So at this point in the presentation, there's a few more slides, not too many more. Does anybody have any questions about what I've already spoken about? Expenses, revenues, anything?
The proposed tax increase on the average taxpayer then would be approximately, from what I understand, what you presented, about 2.56
Yes.
increase.
Yes.
And again, inflation is right now at the last PCE, which is the consumer pricing that the Federal Reserve looks at, over 3%. So that we're under inflation, well under inflation at that amount, and I think that's excellent. The burden, you know, is certainly much less than what regular inflation is.
Right,
on
and
our
average that in
residents.
with last year's non-allowable increase in the CPI, only allowed to the cap, and, you know, it's well over 5, you know, so it's accumulating, you know,
Right,
those
right.
things.
So I think that's very good.
And again, we talked about the biggest part of the budget being that $1.84 million that's going towards the transportation expenses and the capital expenses. And the capital expense that we're increasing the budget by is really already in our reserves. It's
there.
already taxpayer dollars that have
Yeah.
been paid, so the actual budget to budget would be around 1%.
Exactly. It's excellent.
I think that is tremendous, and I
It
think
is.
that if people can understand the grandiose way that transportation is increasing their costs in the next coming years for all districts, it's not just us, it's everybody. The fact that we are marginally at that 1% without transportation is really amazing. And I think that we have to understand that this is something that's just happening. And if the vast majority of the increase is due to something that is out of our control, we have to do the very best that we can with the other portions of the budget, right? And I think that that's what has been done here, to keep our programs alive, to make sure that our students have what they need, to make sure that class sizes are appropriate, to make sure that teachers have what they need as far as training, to bring in a behavioral specialist to cut costs in that way from paying, BOCES. I think that those are all very fiscally responsible things that we've seen in all of the budget presentations about how we can save a little here and a little there to really offset this big transportation cost that we can't even control. So I think that for the public, that's really important that they understand those two pieces about the capital reserve and the transportation.
Right. And make no mistake, we are using $400,000 of our reserves, which is the taxpayer money already paid, to put towards that. And I think that says a lot as well, that, we are not looking to raise anything above where we need to, but we need to keep a good balance because we need to make sure that we maintain enough reserves to be safe. We don't know what other surprises are going to come along. Okay. So I do have to talk about contingent budget, which will lead to the next couple of slides. And I'm going to go into contingent budget, I think, more in the next couple of meetings, because as we get closer to the actual vote, I think this becomes more of a topic of conversation. So what I highlighted there is really what I want to stress tonight, and that is what happens if a school budget is not approved, and emphasize the fact that the Board of Education must adopt a budget. If it's not approved, they must adopt twice, because they do have a chance to put it back up again. But if it gets disapproved for any reason, the Board of Education must adopt a budget that levies a tax no greater than that of the prior year. So what does that mean for Putnam Valley? A proposed reduction of a little over $1 million, $1,030,762. The budget would be subject to contingent budget requirements as well. This means reducing the proposed budget by over $1 million, which in turn would reduce staff as well as diminish programs and program offerings by forcing the district to make cuts and ultimately hurting students and future opportunities for students. And I think that's the emphasis on why we don't want to see a contingent budget. Okay, and
Jill, I'm sorry, I know you said you're going to go over this more in detail, but I know it was brought up last year that this has to be mentioned, what the impact of the contingency budget would be. So that's why you put it into your presentations. That's why you speak on it multiple times, because it must be
absolutely
stated in public what would occur if we.
Yeah, I think just the impact of losing that money in the budget. It's not the taking away of the money we're transferring in of the reserves to help pay for the field that's going to reduce it. That's not going to reduce what we need to reduce.
Right. It's not a scare factor. You have to state this.
Right. And this leads into a conversation about our voter approval rate and compared to the rest of the state. And Dr. Luft is going to talk to you about that.
So this is going to begin my public plea to get individuals out to vote. This slide represents the percentage of votes or passing budgets by what percent. So the statewide, all schools, 74% approval. So in Mid-Hudson, it's 73%. And downstate small schools, 74%, right? So Putnam Valley has a tradition of having much closer ballots. You'll see that Putnam Valley is 54.4%. The scary part is that's 4.5% away from failing. And we have our voter turnout, while not overly impressive, is actually better than many districts in the region. But these slides highlight some of the information that we have, and it's really just to raise awareness. If you look at the two slides on the left, these are voters aged 55 to 74 and voters aged 75 and older. So they represent well over 50% of all votes cast are cast by community members over the age of 55. The typical parent group, parent-aged group, 30 to 54, right? Obviously, there's some that fall outside of that, but In general, that's the group you would consider the age to have parents and most likely to have students in school is only 37% of our vote. And then 6% are individuals aged 18 to 29. So while I'm very appreciative of the senior citizens that come out and vote in our school budget, we really owe them a compliment because they're the ones who are passing our budgets, right? So senior citizens represent more than 50% of our vote. A lot of them are coming out and they're voting to support our budget. So that's greatly appreciated. But I would love to see that 30 to 54 age group increase. The next slide shows parents who voted versus parents who do not vote. So only 25% of our parents come out and vote on our school budget, which means 75% of parents do not vote on our school budget, which, as we know what a contingency budget would do, could drastically impact not only their child's education, but their home values and other things that would go along with a failing school district. If you look at all registered voters, 18.9% of voters registered to vote in Putnam Valley come out and vote on the school budget, which means 81% of registered voters do not cast a ballot each May. So it's that 18.9% that's making this decision, which again could so adversely impact our students. And when you look at all votes cast, parents represent 30% of the votes that were cast last school year, which means 70% of the votes cast were from not parents, from other individuals in our community. So I think this information is very telling. I think obviously the tax cap has created a sense of complacency. Things are going well, there's no real controversy, and people aren't paying a lot of attention. But if you go back 2 slides, 54.4% is pretty close.
Yeah, that is.
And we really need more people, especially our parents, to come out and vote. They could vote, be informed and vote any way they wish, right? We obviously don't know how people are voting, but we certainly know what the numbers are, and we're in desperate need to get more engagement from our community when it's so much is at stake. So some of the ways in which we hope to do that, we're going to hold our informal budget talks again. So we have some dates where they've already been scheduled. Once we get through this presentation, this is sort of the first time we're doing the full budget. So Jill will make herself available. Sometimes I'll sneak in. And really, just an opportunity for anyone who's got a question. You want to go line by line through the budget? We'll do that. You have a question about how something works? We'll do that. You have a concern? We'll certainly sit there and entertain it. Right? These are really informal settings, an opportunity for anyone to come and be empowered with information, factual information. It's inevitable. There'll be incorrect information that'll be posted on social media, and we encourage anyone who has a question or wants factual information to contact the school, and we will always make ourselves available to get you that information. And just a quick reminder, so the budget vote is scheduled for May 21st. Polls are open from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. at the Putnam Valley Elementary School. Anybody who needs an absentee ballot or register to vote, you can contact Maureen Bellino, our district clerk, and her contact information is there. And as I mentioned before, Jill is always available to answer any budget-related questions.